I was arranging fresh daisies in the crystal vase Harold had given me for our 40th anniversary when I heard Chelsea's voice drift down from the upstairs hallway. Her tone carried that particular edge I'd come to recognize over the past 3 years, the one that meant she was making decisions about my life without consulting me. Pack grandma's stuff. She's moving out tomorrow, she told her children, her voice crisp with finality. I've already called the assisted living place. They have a room ready. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal vase slipped from my trembling hands, shattering against the hardwood floor of what had been my home for 43 years. Water and glass scattered across the Persian rug Harold and I had bought during our honeymoon in Istanbul. At 71, I'd survived my husband's death, raised 3 children, and weathered more storms than most people could imagine. But nothing had prepared me for the moment I'd become invisible in my own house. My name is Margaret Whitmore, and until 18 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was the widow who'd successfully managed her finances after Harold's passing. I was the grandmother who baked chocolate chip cookies every Sunday and never missed a school play or soccer game. I was the woman who'd kept her independence, her dignity, and her beautiful colonial home in Riverside Heights despite well-meaning suggestions from family that I might be happier somewhere more manageable. Then my son David remarried. Chelsea Morrison had swept into David's life like a well-dressed tornado, all polished smiles and efficiency. She was 38 to David's 45, a successful real estate agent with perfectly highlighted hair and an Instagram account full of inspirational quotes about living your best life. When they married after a whirlwind 6-month courtship, I genuinely tried to welcome her into our family. I'd given her my grandmother's pearl earrings as a wedding gift and offered to teach her Harold's secret recipe for Sunday pot roast. What I hadn't expected was how quickly my role in David's life would change from beloved mother to inconvenient obligation. The shift had been subtle at first. Chelsea would suggest that David was too busy to help me with household repairs, then recommend contractors who charged 3 times what Harold's old friends would have asked. She'd point out how dangerous it was for me to live alone in such a large house, mentioning every minor stumble or forgotten grocery item as evidence of my declining capabilities. When I'd slipped on the icy front steps last winter and bruised my hip, Chelsea had used it as ammunition for months of conversations about what if something serious happened. 6 months ago, when David suggested I might be more comfortable moving in with them, I'd foolishly thought it was an invitation born of love. Their house was smaller than mine, a modern 4-bedroom in the newer development across town, but I'd imagined cozy evenings helping with homework and weekend family dinners. I'd pictured being useful again, being needed. Instead, I'd become a problem to be managed. Chelsea had rules for everything. I couldn't rearrange furniture in my room because it disrupted the flow of the house. I couldn't cook in the kitchen during her meal prep sessions because I got in the way. I couldn't discipline my own grandchildren when they were disrespectful because it undermined their routine. Slowly but systematically, she'd turned me into a guest in what was supposed to be my new home, and now even that courtesy was apparently coming to an end. I knelt carefully among the shattered crystal, my arthritis making the movement painful, and began picking up the larger pieces. Each fragment caught the afternoon light streaming through the bay window, creating tiny rainbows on the floor. This vase had survived 40 years of dinner parties, holiday celebrations, and countless flower arrangements. It had made it through raising 3 children and hosting dozens of family gatherings, but nothing had prepared me for the moment I'd become invisible in my own house. "Mom, are you okay?" David's voice came from the doorway, and I looked up to see my son approaching with that expression of concerned patience I'd grown to hate. It was the same look he'd give a confused elderly customer at his insurance office. Polite, but slightly condescending. "I dropped the vase," I said unnecessarily, since the evidence was scattered around my knees. Here, let me help you with that. David knelt beside me, but instead of helping collect the pieces, he gently took my hands and helped me stand. Mom, we need to talk. The words every aging parent dreads. We need to talk. Code for decisions have been made about your life, and now we're going to explain them to you in simple terms for your supposedly diminishing mind to comprehend. I heard Chelsea, I said quietly, about packing my things. David's face flushed slightly, caught between embarrassment and defensiveness. You weren't supposed to hear it that way. We were planning to sit down with you after dinner and discuss the transition properly. Transition. As if being forcibly relocated to institutional care was simply a matter of logistics rather than the systematic dismantling of everything I'd worked to preserve. What exactly is this transition, David? He guided me to the living room sofa, the one Harold and I had picked out together 15 years ago, and sat down beside me with the careful attention of someone delivering difficult news. Mom, Chelsea and I have been talking, and we think it would be better for everyone if you move to Sunset Manor. It's a really nice assisted living community, and they have activities, meal service, medical support. Better for everyone, I repeated slowly, or better for Chelsea? That's not fair, Mom. Chelsea has been incredibly patient, but having 3 generations under one roof is challenging for any family. The kids need their space, Chelsea needs her routine, and you deserve to be somewhere that can provide the level of care you need. Level of care I need. I'd been living independently for 3 years since Harold's death, managing my own medications, driving myself to appointments, maintaining my finances, and caring for my home. But apparently dropping a vase now constituted evidence that I required professional supervision. What if I don't want to go? David's expression grew uncomfortable. Mom, you can't stay here by yourself anymore. The house is too big, too expensive to maintain, and too isolated. What if you fell and no one found you for days? What if you forgot to turn off the stove or left a door unlocked? All the standard fears adult children use to justify removing their parents' autonomy. Never mind that I'd never left a stove on or a door unlocked in my entire adult life. Never mind that I had neighbors, friends, and a medical alert system. The possibility of future problems was apparently sufficient justification for present imprisonment. This house has been in our family for over 40 decades. Your father and I raised you children here. This is where you learned to ride a bicycle, where we celebrated your graduation, where Harold proposed to me on the front porch.
I know, Mom, and those are beautiful memories, but they're just memories now. The house is just a building. Just a building. The place where I'd hung Christmas stockings and hosted Thanksgiving dinners, where I'd nursed sick children and celebrated birthdays, where Harold had taken his last breath in our bedroom upstairs, reduced to just a building by a son who'd apparently forgotten what home means. When? I asked. Tomorrow afternoon. Chelsea found a place that had an immediate opening, and we thought it would be easier to make the move quickly rather than dragging it out. Tomorrow. 71 years of life decisions, and my son was giving me less than 24 hours to say goodbye to everything I'd built and loved? From upstairs, I could hear Chelsea's voice again, directing my grandchildren in what sounded like a packing operation. 8-year-old Emma and 12-year-old Jake were apparently being enlisted in the systematic removal of their grandmother from their lives, turned into accessories to their mother's efficiency. What about my things? I asked. My furniture, my photographs, Harold's books. The room at Sunset Manor is furnished, so you'll just need personal items and clothes. Chelsea's arranging for an estate sale company to handle the rest. Don't worry about the details, Mom. We're taking care of everything. Taking care of. Like I was already incapacitated, already incapable of making decisions about my own possessions. My wedding china, Harold's collection of first edition mysteries, the rocking chair where I'd nursed all 3 of my children, all destined for strangers to paw through and purchase for a fraction of their actual value. I stood up abruptly, my hands shaking with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just anger, though anger was certainly part of it. It was something deeper, more fundamental. It was the recognition that my son, the child I'd sacrificed for and worried over and loved unconditionally, was treating me like an inconvenience to be disposed of as efficiently as possible. "I need some air," I announced. "Mom, it's getting dark. Maybe you should just rest for tonight and tomorrow we'll help you get settled at Sunset Manor. You'll see, it's going to be much better than you think." Better than I think? As if my objections to being institutionalized were simply the result of insufficient imagination rather than a reasonable response to having my life upended without consultation? I walked to the front hallway and picked up my purse and keys from the antique table Harold had refinished during our second year of marriage. David followed me, his expression shifting from patient concern to something approaching alarm. "Where are you going?" "Out." "Mom, you're upset. This isn't a good time to be driving." "I've been driving for 55 years, David. I think I can manage a trip around town without supervision." I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch where Harold had proposed 48 years ago, where I'd waved goodbye to David on his first day of school, where I'd sat countless evenings watching sunsets and planning my future. Tomorrow, according to my son and daughter-in-law, I'd be watching sunsets from the window of a sterile room in an institutional facility surrounded by strangers and stripped of everything that made life worth living. The evening air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the streetlights were just beginning to flicker on throughout the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson next door was working in her garden, and she waved when she saw me. Normal life continuing, as if my world wasn't being systematically dismantled. I climbed into my burgundy Buick, the one Harold had insisted on buying from my last birthday because he said it was safe and reliable, just like you. The engine started smoothly, and I backed out of the driveway that had been mine for 43 years. Possibly for the last time. I drove without conscious destination through the neighborhoods where I'd lived my entire adult life. Past the elementary school where I'd volunteered in the library for 15 years, past the church where Harold and I had been married and where I still sing in the choir every Sunday, past the park where I'd pushed my children on swings and later my grandchildren. Everything looked the same, but I felt like I was seeing it through the eyes of someone who'd already been erased from this community. Tomorrow, I'd be a resident of Sunset Manor, visited occasionally by family members who'd successfully convinced themselves they were acting in my best interests. I found myself pulling into the parking lot of Riverside Coffee, the little cafe where Harold and I had shared our first date 50 years ago. It had changed ownership several times since then, but the basic character remained the same. Through the large windows, I could see people my age sitting at small tables, reading newspapers and chatting over coffee. People who still had the freedom to choose where they wanted to spend their evening, who they wanted to see, what they wanted to do with their time. Inside, the cafe smelled like fresh pastries and roasted coffee beans. I ordered Harold's old favorite, a caramel macchiato, and found a quiet table by the window. The young barista, a girl who couldn't have been much older than Emma, had called me sweetie and asked if I needed help carrying my drink to the table. Kindness, perhaps, but also an assumption about my capabilities that would only increase as I aged. At the next table, two women roughly my age were discussing their grandchildren's college plans. Their voices carried the confident authority of people who were still considered competent to have opinions about their families' futures. I wondered how long it would be before their children decided they were too old to live independently, too much trouble to accommodate in family decisions, too inconvenient to consult about their own lives. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Mom, please come home. We need to finish discussing the arrangements for tomorrow." Arrangements. As if my forced relocation was a wedding or a business meeting rather than the end of my independent life. I texted back, "I will be home when I'm ready." The response came immediately. "Mom, this attitude isn't helping anyone. Chelsea has worked very hard to coordinate everything for tomorrow. The least you can do is cooperate." Cooperate. With the systematic destruction of my autonomy, with the liquidation of my home and possessions, with the premature burial of my independence in a facility designed to warehouse elderly people whose families couldn't be bothered to actually care for them? I turned off my phone and stared out the window at the parking lot where Harold had nervously asked me to be his girlfriend 5 decades ago.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Back then, I'd thought the future stretched ahead like an endless highway full of possibilities.
Marriage, children, a home, a lifetime of shared experiences and mutual support. I'd never imagined I'd spend my final years being treated like a burden by the very people I'd devoted my life to nurturing. The cafe was beginning to empty as evening settled into night. I finished my coffee slowly, savoring what might be my last autonomous decision for a very long time. Tomorrow, I'd wake up in a place I hadn't chosen, surrounded by possessions selected by someone else, following a schedule designed by strangers who measured my value by my level of compliance rather than my lifetime of contributions to my family and community, unless I found a way to change the narrative. For the first time since I'd heard Chelsea's pronouncement about packing my things, I felt something other than despair settling in my chest. It was a familiar sensation, one I remembered from decades of teaching high school English. It was the feeling I'd gotten when faced with a particularly challenging student or an impossible curriculum deadline. It was determination. Margaret Whitmore had not survived 7 decades of life, raised 3 children, nursed a husband through cancer, and maintained her independence for 3 years after his death, only to be discarded like an unwanted piece of furniture by a daughter-in-law who'd known the family for less than 2 years. I gathered my purse and walked back to my car with more purpose than I'd felt in months. If David and Chelsea thought they could dispose of me without a fight, they'd seriously underestimated the woman who'd once organized a school board revolt over budget cuts and successfully lobbied the city council for better street lighting in our neighborhood. The drive home took me past Sunset Manor, the assisted living facility where I was apparently expected to spend my remaining years. It was a low, beige building surrounded by carefully maintained landscaping and a parking lot full of sedans and visiting family members. Through the large windows, I could see residents sitting in a common area, watching television, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of whatever program had been selected for them. It looked clean, safe, and utterly soul-crushing. I pulled into my own driveway with the engine of rebellion humming in my veins. The house was blazing with lights, and I could see figures moving around upstairs in what I presumed was continued packing activity. David's car sat in the driveway next to Chelsea's white Mercedes, both vehicles positioned as if they owned the space where Harold and I had parked for 4 decades. Before going inside, I walked around to the backyard where Harold had spent countless hours tending his vegetable garden. The tomato plants were still producing, heavy with late-season fruit that would probably rot on the vine after I was removed tomorrow. Harold's tool shed stood at the back of the property, still organized exactly as he'd left it 3 years ago. I'd kept it as a sort of shrine to his memory, but tomorrow it would be just another item for the estate sale company to liquidate. The back porch light cast a warm glow over the garden, and I could almost see Harold kneeling among his plants, dirt under his fingernails and satisfaction on his weathered face. He'd been 68 when he died, just old enough to start thinking about retirement, but not old enough to lose his independence. He'd never had to face the humiliation of being declared incompetent by his own children. "What would you do, Harold?" I whispered to the night air. The answer came to me with startling clarity. Harold would fight. He'd never accepted defeat gracefully, whether he was battling cancer or arguing with insurance companies or defending our property line against an aggressive neighbor. Harold Whitmore had never backed down from a challenge, and he'd raised his wife to be equally stubborn when the situation demanded it. I walked back through the kitchen door to find David and Chelsea waiting at the kitchen table with papers spread between them like a war council planning their next offensive. "Mom, thank goodness you're back," David said, standing up with obvious relief. "We were starting to worry." "I'm fine," I replied, noting the stack of documents on the table. "What's all this?" Chelsea answered with her most professional smile, the one she probably used with difficult real estate clients. "These are the papers for Sunset Manor, financial information for the estate sale, and some legal documents David thought you should review." Legal documents. I moved closer to examine the papers and felt my blood pressure spike. Power of attorney forms, financial account transfer authorizations, and what appeared to be a deed transfer document. "What exactly are these legal documents for?" I asked, my voice carefully controlled. David shifted uncomfortably.
Mom, we thought it would be simpler if I handled your finances going forward. You won't need to worry about bills or investments or property taxes anymore. Simpler for whom? For you, of course. Managing money gets more complicated as we age, and this way you can focus on enjoying your retirement without the stress of financial decisions. I picked up the power of attorney document and read it carefully. Comprehensive financial control, authority to make medical decisions, permission to sell property and liquidate assets. If I signed this document, David would legally own my life. And if I don't want to sign these papers? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire neither of them had expected. Chelsea's professional smile faltered slightly, and David's expression shifted from patient concern to something more calculating. Mom, these documents are designed to protect you, Chelsea said defensively. If something happens to your mental capacity, wouldn't you rather have family making decisions than leaving it up to the state? Mental capacity, the nuclear option in every adult child's arsenal. The suggestion that aging parents were inevitably sliding toward incompetence, and that anyone who resisted being managed was already showing signs of cognitive decline. My mental capacity is perfectly fine. Fine enough to recognize a complete power grab when I see one. Mom, that's not what this is, David protested. We're trying to help you transition to the next phase of your life with dignity and security. Dignity? I looked around the kitchen where I'd prepared thousands of meals, where I'd helped David with homework and bandaged his scraped knees, where Harold and I had planned our budget and discussed our dreams. You think there's dignity in having my life's possessions sold off like garage sale items? You think there's dignity in being shipped off to an institution because I'm inconvenient? Sunset Manor isn't an institution, Chelsea said defensively. It's a community designed specifically for people your age with your needs. My needs. Tell me, Chelsea, what exactly do you think my needs are? She blinked, clearly not expecting to be challenged so directly. Well, you need medical support, social interaction with peers, help with daily activities, safety supervision. I need my home. I need my independence. I need to be treated like a human being rather than a problem to be solved.
My voice was rising, but I didn't care. I need my son to remember that I'm his mother, not his burden. David stood up abruptly, his patience finally fraying. Mom, this is exactly the kind of unreasonable behavior that proves you're not thinking clearly. We're trying to help you, and you're acting like we're the enemy. Unreasonable behavior. Another weapon in the arsenal of adult children who decided their parents were no longer competent to make their own decisions. Any resistance to their plans became evidence of mental decline. Any assertion of independence became proof of poor judgment. I set the papers down on the table with deliberate care. I'm not signing anything tonight, and I'm certainly not packing anything for a move I never agreed to. David's voice carried a warning now. We've already paid the deposit at Sunset Manor. The estate sale company is coming on Friday. Everything has been arranged. Then you'd better start making phone calls to unarrange it. Chelsea leaned forward with her most persuasive expression. Margaret, I understand this is difficult, but sometimes we have to make hard decisions for the people we love. You raised David to be responsible and caring, and now he's trying to take care of you the same way you took care of him. The comparison was so fundamentally wrong that it took my breath away. When I took care of David, I was helping him grow into independence. What you're doing is destroying the independence I've spent a lifetime building. But at your age, Chelsea continued, independence isn't always possible or safe. At my age, I've earned the right to take whatever risks I choose. I looked directly at my son. David, I raised you to respect other people's autonomy and dignity. What happened to those values? For a moment, just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face that looked like the boy I'd raised. But it was quickly replaced by the determined expression of a man who'd already committed to a course of action. Mom, you're not being rational about this. Rational, the final insult. When adult children couldn't convince their parents to comply with forced dependency, they questioned their rationality. It was a short step from not thinking clearly to mentally incompetent, and from there to legal guardianship and complete loss of autonomy. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at Harold's garden, thinking about all the battles we'd fought together and apart. Harold wouldn't have tolerated the situation for 5 minutes. He'd have thrown David and Chelsea out of the house and changed the locks. But Harold wasn't here, and I was facing this alone. Or was I? "I'm going to bed," I announced. "Tomorrow we'll discuss this situation when everyone has had time to think more clearly about what's fair and what's right." "Mom, there's nothing to discuss," David said. "The arrangements have been made." "Then unmake them." I walked upstairs, leaving them sitting at the kitchen table with their unsigned papers and their stalled plans. In my bedroom, I could hear muffled conversation from downstairs, probably David and Chelsea strategizing about how to overcome my resistance. I could hear movement from the guest rooms, where my grandchildren were apparently continuing the packing operation, despite my objections. But for the first time since I'd heard Chelsea's announcement about moving me out, I felt like I had some power in this situation. I hadn't signed their papers. I hadn't agreed to their plans. And until they could prove I was mentally incompetent, they couldn't legally force me to do anything. The question was whether I could figure out how to protect myself before they found a way to override my resistance. I sat on the edge of the bed where Harold and I had shared 45 years of marriage and 3 years of widowhood, and tried to think like the strategic woman I'd once been. Somewhere in this house was the woman who'd successfully fought the school board, negotiated with insurance companies, and managed a household budget through decades of economic uncertainty. That woman wouldn't have accepted defeat without exploring every possible alternative. That woman was still here, and she was about to remind everyone exactly what Margaret Whitmore was capable of when her back was against the wall. The next morning, I woke at 5:30, the same time I'd been rising for 50 years of marriage and 3 years of widowhood. The house felt different somehow, charged with an energy I hadn't experienced since Harold's funeral. Downstairs, I could hear the familiar sounds of Chelsea preparing breakfast with military precision, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables and the aggressive whir of her expensive juicer. I dressed carefully in my navy blue suit, the one I'd worn to parent-teacher conferences when I needed to project authority. If today was going to be a battle, I intended to look like someone capable of winning it. In the mirror, I saw a woman who'd let herself fade into the background of her own life, but that woman was about to make some changes. Chelsea was arranging organic spinach smoothies and steel-cut oats when I entered the kitchen. She looked up with surprise, clearly not expecting me to be dressed for anything more significant than supervised institutional living. "Margaret, you're up early. I've made a protein smoothie that'll be perfect for your new routine at Sunset Manor. They serve breakfast at 8, so you'll want to adjust your schedule." "I won't be needing to adjust my schedule," I replied calmly, pouring myself coffee from the pot Harold had given me 20 years ago, "because I won't be going to Sunset Manor." Chelsea smiled tightened almost imperceptibly. "David explained everything last night. The arrangements are finalized." David explained his plans. I haven't agreed to anything. Emma bounced into the kitchen wearing her school uniform, backpack already strapped to her shoulders. At 8 years old, she still possessed the unfiltered honesty that adults spend decades learning to suppress. "Grandma, are you really moving to the old people's place today?" "What do you think about that idea, sweetheart?" Emma considered this with the seriousness of someone's opinion was rarely solicited on important family matters.
"I think it's stupid. You're not old. You still make the best pancakes, and you know all the good stories about when Daddy was little." "Emma, that's enough," Chelsea interjected sharply. "Adults make these decisions based on what's best for everyone." "But why is it best?" Emma persisted with the relentless logic of childhood. "Grandma lives here now. She helps me with my homework, and she reads me stories when Mommy's too busy." Out of the mouths of babes. My 8-year-old granddaughter had identified the fundamental flaw in Chelsea's argument in 30 seconds. I wasn't a burden requiring management. I was a contributing member of this household who happened to be inconvenient for Chelsea's vision of family life. "Emma, go get your brother. The bus comes in 20 minutes, Chelsea commanded, her patience clearly strained. After Emma left, Chelsea turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. The professional smile was completely gone, replaced by something much more calculating. Margaret, I'm going to be very direct with you. This transition is happening whether you cooperate or not. David and I have legal options if you continue to be difficult. Legal options. The threat every aging person feared. The suggestion that resistance to family decisions could be reframed as evidence of incompetence requiring court intervention. What kind of legal options? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Guardianship proceedings. If we can demonstrate that you're no longer capable of making rational decisions about your safety and welfare, the court will appoint David as your legal guardian. Then your cooperation won't be necessary. The words hit me like ice water. Guardianship meant complete loss of autonomy, the legal equivalent of being declared a child again. David would control my finances, my living arrangements, my medical decisions, even my social contacts. I'd become property, owned and managed by my son and his wife. On what grounds would you claim I'm incompetent? Chelsea's smile returned, but now it looked predatory. Yesterday, you became agitated and confused about simple living arrangements. You left the house after dark without telling anyone where you were going. You're refusing to sign necessary legal documents. You're showing signs of paranoia and unreasonable suspicion about family members who are trying to help you. She'd been building a case against me, I realized. Every moment of resistance, every question about their plans, every assertion of my own preferences was being reframed as evidence of mental decline. Chelsea wasn't just trying to get rid of me. She was systematically maneuvering to gain legal control over my assets and eliminate me as an influence in her children's lives. You've thought this through quite thoroughly, I observed. David and I believe in being prepared. We're hoping you'll make the smart choice and cooperate voluntarily, but we're ready to take whatever steps are necessary to protect you from yourself. Protect me from myself? The ultimate justification for destroying someone's autonomy. Any resistance to their control became evidence that I needed their control. Jake wandered into the kitchen carrying his soccer gear, looking like a 12-year-old who'd rather be anywhere else. Unlike his sister, he seemed to understand the adult undercurrents in the conversation, and his expression was carefully neutral. "Morning, Grandma," he said quietly, avoiding eye contact with his mother. "Good morning, sweetheart. Are you ready for your game on Saturday?" Jake shrugged. "I guess, if you're still here to watch." "Jacob," Chelsea's voice carried a warning. "We've discussed this. Grandma will be settling into her new home, but she'll still be part of our family." "But she won't live here anymore," Jake said with the brutal honesty of adolescence. "She won't be here when I get home from school, or when I need help with math, or when I want to hear stories about when Daddy was my age." Chelsea's jaw tightened. "You'll see Grandma on visits. It'll be special time together." "Visits aren't the same," Jake muttered, grabbing a granola bar and heading toward the door. "Everything's different now." After both children left for school, the kitchen fell into tense silence. Chelsea busied herself with cleaning already spotless counters, while I sipped my coffee and tried to process what I'd learned. This wasn't just about inconvenience or family dynamics. Chelsea was systematically maneuvering to gain legal control over my assets and eliminate me as an influence in her children's lives. The question was why? David appeared in the doorway wearing his insurance agent uniform and an expression of determined cheerfulness. "Morning, Mom. I hope you've had time to think about everything we discussed last night." "I have indeed. I've decided I'd like to see the financial arrangements for this transition before I agree to anything." "Financial arrangements?" David looked confused. "Mom, you don't need to worry about money. Chelsea and I are handling all the details." "I'm sure you are,
But I'd like to understand what's happening to my assets before I sign any documents or make any moves. Chelsea and David exchanged a look that confirmed my growing suspicions. There were financial implications to this forced relocation that they hadn't shared with me. Mom, the important thing is making sure you're safe and comfortable, David said carefully. The financial details are complicated, but Chelsea's handled everything professionally. I'm sure she has, but I'd like to review those details myself before I make any decisions. Mom, you said yourself that managing finances gets more stressful as we age. Why don't you let us handle the complicated stuff while you focus on getting settled in your new home? The casual condescension in his voice made my teeth clench. My son was speaking to me like I was already incompetent, already incapable of understanding my own financial situation. David, I've been managing finances successfully for 71 years. I think I can handle reviewing documents related to my own assets. Chelsea stepped forward with her most professional expression. Margaret, if you insist on reviewing everything, that's your right. But it's going to delay the transition, and Sunset Manor won't hold the room indefinitely. Then perhaps this transition is happening too quickly, I suggested. Or perhaps you're overthinking a straightforward situation, Chelsea countered. Sometimes analysis paralysis prevents us from making necessary changes. Analysis paralysis. Another subtle suggestion that my desire to understand the situation was evidence of declining mental function rather than reasonable caution. David checked his watch with obvious impatience. Mom, I need to get to work and Chelsea has appointments all day. Can we finish this conversation tonight? Actually, I think I'll spend today reviewing my financial situation and legal options. I'll let you know this evening what I've decided. The silence that followed was pregnant with unspoken threats and calculations. David and Chelsea had clearly expected me to comply meekly with their timeline, and my resistance was forcing them to reconsider their strategy. Mom, I really hope you'll be reasonable about this, David said finally. We're trying to do what's best for everyone. After they left, I sat alone in the kitchen that had been the center of my family life for 4 decades. But instead of feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of my situation, I felt energized by the clarity of my purpose. Chelsea and David weren't acting out of concern for my welfare. They were executing a plan that served their interests, and they were counting on my compliance to make it work. Time to disappoint them. I called my attorney first, reaching the voicemail of Patricia Summers, the woman who'd handled Harold's estate and our family legal matters for 15 years. I left a detailed message explaining my situation and requesting an emergency consultation. Then I called my bank and requested copies of all account statements for the past year, along with documentation of any authorized signatories or beneficiary changes. The bank representative, a pleasant young man named Michael, seemed surprised by my request. Mrs. Whitmore, your account hasn't had any unusual activity. Is there a specific concern? I just want to review everything before I make some important decisions. Can you tell me if anyone else has access to my accounts? Let me check. There was a pause while he reviewed my file. Your son David was added as a joint account holder 6 months ago. He has full access to checking and savings, and he's listed as the primary beneficiary on your certificates of deposit. 6 months ago, right around the time David had first suggested I might be more comfortable living with them. The timing wasn't coincidental. Did I sign paperwork authorizing those changes? Another pause. Yes, ma'am. We have signature cards on file, though the additions were processed through our online banking system using your login credentials. My login credentials, which I'd foolishly shared with David when he'd offered to help me set up online banking. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Can you tell me about any recent account activity? Well, there have been several transfers over the past few months. Large amounts moved from savings to checking, and then significant withdrawals. But since David is an authorized user, all transactions are legitimate. Large withdrawals. Money being moved around without my knowledge or authorization, using access I'd granted for emergencies? I felt sick. How much has been withdrawn in total? Let me calculate that for you. Michael's voice grew concerned as he added up the figures. Mrs. Whitmore, it looks like approximately $47,000 has been withdrawn from your accounts over the past 3 months. $47,000? Nearly half of my liquid savings, gone without my knowledge. Money I'd accumulated through decades of careful budgeting and prudent investing, transferred by my son for purposes he'd never discussed with me. Can you provide me with detailed records of all transactions? Of course. I can have those ready for pickup this afternoon. Mrs. Whitmore, are you concerned about unauthorized access to your accounts? I'm concerned about a lot of things right now. Michael, thank you for your help. After hanging up, I sat staring at Harold's garden through the kitchen window, trying to process what I'd learned.
David hadn't just been planning to move me to assisted living. He'd been systematically draining my accounts, using access I'd granted him for emergencies to fund some purpose that required hiding $47,000 from me. The phone rang, startling me from my calculations. Patricia Summers' voice was warm but concerned when I answered. "Margaret, I got your message. This sounds quite serious. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" "Patricia, I think my son is trying to steal my assets and have me declared incompetent. How much trouble am I in?" "That depends on what evidence we're dealing with. Bring any documents you have and we'll figure out exactly what's happening and how to protect you." "I may not have much time. They're expecting me to move to assisted living today." "Margaret, you are not moving anywhere until we've reviewed your situation thoroughly. Do you understand me? You have rights and no one can force you into institutional care without proper legal procedures." The relief in Patricia's voice was like a lifeline. Someone with legal expertise was confirming that I wasn't powerless in this situation, that Chelsea and David's threats weren't as absolute as they'd made them sound. What should I do if they try to force the issue? Call the police, Adult Protective Services, my office. Anyone who tries to remove you from your home against your will is committing a crime, regardless of their relationship to you. After ending the call, I walked through my house with new eyes, seeing it not as the burden David and Chelsea claimed it was, but as the asset they were trying to control. A beautiful colonial in an excellent neighborhood, probably worth close to $400,000 in the current market. Combined with my savings, investments, and Harold's life insurance, I was sitting on a substantial estate that someone was very interested in managing. The front door opened and I heard Chelsea's voice calling out, "Margaret, are you here? I brought some boxes to help with the packing." I found her in the living room with an armload of moving boxes and packing supplies, her expression bright with false enthusiasm. "I thought we could make this easier by getting started with your personal items," she said, setting the boxes down with decisive efficiency. "I've arranged for the estate sale company to come Friday, so we need to separate what you're keeping from what's being sold." "I haven't agreed to any estate sale." "Margaret, you can't take everything to Sunset Manor. The room is furnished, and they have very specific guidelines about personal belongings." I watched her unpack boxes and tape, marveling at her assumption that my compliance was inevitable. "Chelsea, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why is it so important to you that I move out immediately?" She paused in her unpacking, clearly not expecting such a direct question. "I've explained that. The arrangement isn't working for anyone. But specifically, why can't we take time to find a solution that works better for everyone? Why does this have to happen today?" Chelsea's professional smile flickered for just a moment, and I saw something calculating behind her eyes. "Margaret, sometimes delay just makes difficult situations harder. It's better to make clean breaks." "Clean breaks from what? From dependency? From outdated arrangements? From situations that prevent everyone from moving forward with their lives?" Moving forward with their lives. Interesting phrasing, as if my presence was preventing some plan from proceeding. "Chelsea, what exactly are you and David planning to do with this house?" The question clearly caught her off guard.
She fumbled with the tape dispenser, avoiding eye contact. Well, eventually it'll need to be sold to pay for your care. Eventually, or have you already made plans? I don't know what you mean. I mean, have you and David already discussed selling this property for specific purposes? Chelsea's facade finally cracked completely. Her professional smile disappeared, replaced with cold irritation. Margaret, David is your son and your power of attorney. Decisions about your assets are his responsibility now. I haven't signed any power of attorney documents, but you will, today, because the alternative is a competency hearing that you won't win. There it was, the real threat, delivered without pretense or politeness. Sign over control of my life voluntarily or have it taken away through legal proceedings. And if I refuse both options, then you'll find out how difficult life can become for elderly people who don't have family support. The casual cruelty of the statement took my breath away. Chelsea wasn't just threatening to institutionalize me. She was threatening to abandon me entirely if I didn't cooperate with her plans. What kind of family support are you providing exactly? The kind that keeps you safe, housed, and cared for, instead of alone and vulnerable?
The kind that removes $47,000 from my bank accounts without my knowledge? Chelsea's face went white. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely shocked, her careful composure completely shattered. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think you and David have been planning this transition for months, moving my money around to fund whatever comes next. That's ridiculous! David would never steal from you. Then explain why nearly $50,000 has been withdrawn from my accounts over the past 3 months. Chelsea stood up abruptly, abandoning her packing supplies. Margaret, you're obviously confused about your financial situation. This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that proves you need professional care. Paranoid thinking? Another weapon in the arsenal of people trying to gaslight their victims. Any attempt to question suspicious behavior became evidence of mental instability. I'm confused about why my son has been secretly draining my accounts while planning to move me to institutional care. Help me understand the connection. There is no connection because there's no secret draining of anything. David has been managing your finances responsibly. Without telling me? Because you get upset about financial details, because managing money stresses you out, because David is trying to protect you from unnecessary worry. By stealing my assets? By managing them appropriately. Chelsea's voice was rising now, her professional veneer completely abandoned. Margaret, you're 71 years old. You don't need to be making complex financial decisions anymore. But David and you do? David and I are capable of thinking long-term about what's best for this family. This family, including me or just the profitable parts. Chelsea gathered her purse and headed toward the door. I'm going to call David. This conversation is over. Chelsea, wait! She turned back with obvious reluctance. Where did the money go? For a moment, I thought she might actually answer honestly. Her expression shifted from anger to something that looked almost like guilt. But then her professional mask snapped back into place. Ask David. He handles all the complicated financial stuff. After she left, I sat surrounded by empty moving boxes and tried to piece together what I'd learned. David had been systematically removing money from my accounts while planning to institutionalize me and sell my property. Chelsea was clearly part of the plan, possibly the architect of it, and they were prepared to have me declared incompetent if I didn't cooperate voluntarily. But I'd also learned that I wasn't as powerless as they'd led me to believe. I had legal rights, an attorney willing to help me, and evidence of financial manipulation that might be prosecutable as elder abuse. The phone rang again, and David's name appeared on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message. Mom, Patricia says you're having some confusion about your bank accounts. I'm coming home early so we can clear this up. Please don't do anything rash while I'm driving over. Confusion about my bank accounts, as if accurately identifying unauthorized withdrawals was a symptom of dementia rather than evidence of theft.
I called Patricia Summers back and moved my appointment up to immediately. Then I called a taxi, gathered my purse and the house key Harold had given me 43 years ago, and prepared to fight for my life. Because that's what this was, a fight for my life, my autonomy, my dignity, and my right to make my own decisions about my own future. David and Chelsea had miscalculated badly if they thought Margaret Whitmore would go quietly into managed obsolescence. I'd spent 50 years teaching teenagers to think critically and stand up for themselves. Time to apply those lessons to my own situation. The taxi pulled into my driveway just as David's car rounded the corner. I climbed into the back seat and gave the driver Patricia's address. Watching through the rear window as my son pulled into the driveway, I was leaving. For the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not in my house waiting to be managed, but out in the world, taking action to protect myself. Margaret Whitmore was about to remind everyone exactly what happened when you tried to steal from a woman who'd spent her entire career outsmarting people who thought they were smarter than she was. This was going to be interesting. Patricia Summers' law office occupied the second floor of a restored Victorian building downtown, the kind of space that projected competence without intimidation. I'd been here before for Harold's will and various family legal matters, but today the familiar surroundings felt like a fortress where I could finally speak freely about what was happening to my life. Patricia greeted me with a warm embrace that immediately made me feel less alone in this battle. At 62, she'd been practicing family law for over 30 years, and her silver hair and kind eyes had seen every variation of family dysfunction imaginable. "Margaret, tell me everything," she said, settling me into a comfortable chair across from her desk. "Don't leave out any details, no matter how small they seem." I recounted the past 24 hours, from Chelsea's announcement about packing my belongings to the discovery of missing money, to the threats about competency hearings. Patricia took notes throughout my account, occasionally asking clarifying questions that helped me see patterns I'd missed. "You said David was added to your accounts 6 months ago?" "Yes, right around the time he first suggested I might want to move in with."
And the withdrawals started when? 3 months ago, according to the bank. Patricia made a note. That timing suggests planning rather than impulse. Margaret, I need to ask you some direct questions about your mental and physical capabilities. My heart sank. Even my own attorney was going to question my competence. "I understand why you need to ask," I said carefully. "Do you take any medications that might affect your cognitive function? Blood pressure medication and a daily vitamin. Nothing that impacts my thinking. Have you been experiencing any memory problems, confusion, or difficulty managing daily tasks? No more than any person my age. I occasionally forget where I put my reading glasses or struggle to remember a neighbor's name, but nothing that interferes with my ability to live independently." Patricia smiled. "Good, because if Chelsea and David try to pursue guardianship, those are exactly the questions a court evaluator would ask. Your answers suggest they'd have a very difficult time proving incompetence." Relief flooded through me. "So they can't just have me declared incompetent?" "Not without clear evidence of cognitive impairment that prevents you from making reasonable decisions about your own welfare. Disagreeing with your family's plans doesn't constitute incompetence." "What about the missing money?" Patricia's expression grew serious. "That's potentially criminal. Unauthorized use of joint account access could constitute elder financial abuse, which is a felony in this state. But David is listed as an authorized user. Joint account access is intended for convenience and emergencies, not for one party to secretly drain the account without the other's knowledge. If David took your money for his own purposes while concealing it from you, that's theft, regardless of his technical authorization." I felt vindicated for the first time since this nightmare began. My instincts about David and Chelsea's behavior weren't paranoid or confused. They were accurate assessments of criminal activity. What can we do about it? "First, we're going to protect your remaining assets. I'm calling the bank right now to remove David's access and freeze any further withdrawals." Patricia dialed my bank and spoke with authority that made me realize how much power I'd been giving away by trying to handle the situation alone. Within 10 minutes, my accounts were secured and David's access was revoked. Next, we're going to file a police report about the unauthorized withdrawals. Elder financial abuse is taken very seriously by law enforcement. Will David be arrested? That depends on what the investigation reveals. If he took your money for legitimate expenses related to your care, that's one thing. If he took it for personal use or to fund plans you didn't approve, that's criminal theft. Patricia pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Margaret, I'm also going to draft an emergency protective order to prevent anyone from removing you from your home against your will. This will give us time to sort out the financial issues without the pressure of immediate relocation. Can they still try to have me declared incompetent? They can try, but it's an expensive and time-consuming process that requires substantial evidence. Based on our conversation today, I don't think they have a case. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt like I could breathe properly. Margaret Whitmore wasn't going quietly into institutional care, and she wasn't losing her life savings without a fight. Patricia, there's something else. I think Chelsea and David have been planning this for months. The timing of everything, the way they've isolated me from decisions about my own life, the way they've been building a case for my incompetence. This feels coordinated. Tell me more about that. I described Chelsea's systematic undermining of my confidence, the way every minor mishap became evidence of declining capability, the legal documents they'd prepared without my input. Margaret, what you're describing sounds like a planned exploitation scheme. Some people target elderly family members systematically, isolating them and manufacturing evidence of incompetence to gain control of their assets. You think Chelsea has done this before? I think Chelsea is very sophisticated about manipulating family dynamics to achieve financial goals. The question is whether David is a willing participant or another victim. What do you mean? Sometimes adult children get manipulated by new spouses who identify elderly parents as financial opportunities. David might genuinely believe he's protecting you while being used by Chelsea to execute her plan. The possibility that my son was being manipulated rather than being the primary architect of my betrayal offered a small comfort. But it didn't change the reality that my life was being dismantled by people I'd trusted. What happens next? We fight back, systematically and strategically. Patricia's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd won battles like this before. By tomorrow morning, you'll have legal protection from forced relocation, your assets will be secured, and law enforcement will be investigating the missing money. What about David and Chelsea? They're about to discover that stealing from elderly family members has serious consequences. I left Patricia's office feeling more empowered than I had in months. The taxi ride home gave me time to process everything I learned and prepare for whatever confrontation was waiting for me. David's car was still in my driveway when I arrived, along with Chelsea's Mercedes and a rental truck I didn't recognize. Through the living room window, I could see people moving around inside my house, apparently continuing with packing operations despite my absence. I paid the taxi driver and walked through my front door to find chaos. Boxes everywhere, furniture moved around, and strangers in work clothes carrying my possessions toward the truck.
David stood in the middle of it all with a clipboard, directing the operation like a military commander. "Mom, thank God you're back," he said, rushing toward me with obvious relief. "Where have you been? We've been worried sick." "I've been protecting myself," I replied calmly. "Protecting yourself from what?" "From people who think they can steal my money and institutionalize me without consequences." The activity in the room stopped. The workers paused with my belongings in their hands, and Chelsea emerged from the kitchen with an expression of carefully controlled anger. "Margaret, I think you're having another episode of confusion," she said with false concern. "David, maybe we should call her doctor." "I'm not confused. I'm well informed." I pulled out the papers Patricia had given me. "This is a cease and desist order preventing anyone from removing my possessions or forcing me to relocate. This is documentation that David's access to my bank accounts has been revoked. And this is a police report number for the investigation into $47,000 that was stolen from my accounts." The silence that followed was deafening.
David's face went white, and Chelsea looked like she'd been slapped. "Mom, you called the police?" "I reported a crime. Stealing money from elderly family members is elder abuse, which is a felony." "I didn't steal anything," David protested. "I was managing your finances." "By secretly withdrawing $50,000 for purposes you never discussed with me?" "That money was for your care, for this transition, for making sure you had everything you needed." $50,000 for a transition that was supposed to happen in one day? David fumbled for an explanation, but Chelsea stepped forward with renewed composure. "Margaret, those withdrawals were legitimate expenses related to preparing for your future care needs. The assisted living deposit, moving expenses, legal fees, medical consultations." "Show me the receipts." Another moment of silence. "What receipts?" Chelsea asked. "If David spent $50,000 of my money on legitimate expenses, there should be receipts, contracts, documentation of where every penny went." David and Chelsea exchanged a look that confirmed everything I suspected. The money hadn't been spent on my care. It had been diverted for their own purposes, and they'd been counting on my compliance to avoid having to account for it. "Mom, I don't think you understand how expensive quality elder care is," David said weakly. "I understand that Sunset Manor requires a $5,000 deposit, not $50,000. I also understand that you don't pay moving expenses and legal fees months before telling someone they're being moved." One of the workers cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Ma'am, do you want us to continue loading, or should we wait?" I looked around at my home being systematically dismantled by strangers, at my son and daughter-in-law who'd been willing to destroy my life for money, at the chaos they'd created in a house that had been peaceful and orderly for 43 years. "Put everything back exactly where you found it," I said firmly. "This move is canceled." "Mom, you can't just cancel everything," David protested. "We've paid deposits, signed contracts, made commitments." "Then you'll have to deal with the consequences of making commitments about my life without my permission." Chelsea's professional facade finally cracked completely. "Margaret, you're being completely unreasonable. We're trying to help you, and you're acting like we're criminals." "You are criminals. You stole my money and tried to force me into institutional care against my will. What would you call that?" "Family members making difficult decisions for someone who's no longer capable of making them herself." "Except I am capable. My attorney confirmed it, my doctor would confirm it, and any court evaluator would confirm it. The only people who think I'm incompetent are the ones who benefit from declaring me incompetent." David sank into my living room chair, the weight of reality finally settling on his shoulders. "Mom, what have I done?" For the first time since this ordeal began, my son looked like the boy I'd raised, rather than the stranger who'd been trying to steal my life. But Chelsea wasn't finished fighting. "David, don't let her manipulate you with guilt. Everything we've done has been for legitimate reasons." "Chelsea, I stole from my own mother," David said quietly. "I took money from the woman who raised me and sacrificed for me my entire life." "You managed assets that were going to be needed for her care anyway. Without telling her, without asking her permission, without even explaining what I was doing. Because she would have said no. Because it was wrong." I watched this exchange with fascination, seeing the dynamic between David and Chelsea from a new perspective. My son wasn't the calculating mastermind I had imagined. He was a weak man who'd been manipulated by a woman who specialized in identifying and exploiting family vulnerabilities. "David, where did the money go?" I asked gently. He looked up with tears in his eyes. "Chelsea said we needed capital for her real estate investment. She said it was guaranteed to triple within 6 months, and we'd be able to pay you back with interest before you ever knew it was gone."
A real estate investment. Chelsea had used my money to fund her business ventures while planning to warehouse me in assisted living. And when the investment didn't perform as expected, she said we needed more time, that moving you to Sunset Manor would reduce expenses and give us breathing room to make the money back. And if the investment failed completely, David's silence was answer enough. If Chelsea's real estate scheme collapsed, my money would be gone forever, and I'd be trapped in institutional care with no resources to escape. "Chelsea," I said, turning to face my daughter-in-law directly, "how many families have you done this to?" "I don't know what you mean." I mean, how many elderly family members have you convinced their adult children to exploit for investment capital? Her expression shifted to something cold and calculating. Margaret, you're obviously delusional if you think I'm running some kind of elder abuse scheme. Patricia Summers disagrees. She thinks you're very sophisticated about manipulating family dynamics for financial gain. The mention of my attorney's name and professional opinion seemed to deflate Chelsea's remaining fight. She looked around the room at the boxes and chaos, at David's guilt-stricken face, at the workers waiting for direction. "Fine," she said finally. "David, we're leaving." "Chelsea, wait," David protested. "We need to figure out how to fix this." "There's nothing to fix. Your mother has made her choice. She'd rather live alone in this house than accept help from family who care about her." "Care about her money, you mean," David said, finally seeing the situation clearly. Chelsea gathered her purse and headed for the door, pausing only to deliver one final threat. "Margaret, you think you've won something here, but you've just guaranteed that you'll be completely alone when you really do need help. Don't expect your family to be available when this independence experiment fails." After she left, David and I sat in awkward silence while the workers finished returning my possessions to their original locations. The house slowly returned to normal, but the relationship between my son and me felt irreparably damaged. "Mom, I'm so sorry," David said finally. "I know that's not enough, but I need you to know that I never meant for it to go this far." "What did you mean for it to go, David?" "I thought we were protecting you. Chelsea made it sound like you were vulnerable and we needed to take control before something bad happened. Something bad did happen. My own son decided I was incompetent and stole my life savings." I know, and I hate myself for it." David looked around the living room where he'd grown up. "How do I fix this?" "You start by returning my money." "I will. I'll liquidate the investment, take out loans if necessary, whatever it takes to make you whole. And you get counseling to figure out how you let yourself be manipulated into betraying your own mother." David nodded miserably. "What about us? Can we ever get past this?" I considered the question seriously. My son had committed crimes against me, violated my trust, and tried to destroy my independence. But he'd also been manipulated by a woman who specialized in exploiting family relationships for profit. "David, you're my son and I love you, but trust has to be rebuilt, and that's going to take time." "I understand. And you need to understand that I'm not a burden or a problem that needs managing. I'm your mother who deserves respect and autonomy." "I understand that too." After David left, I stood alone in my house, surrounded by the possessions I'd almost lost and the independence I'd successfully defended. The Persian rug still bore faint stains from yesterday's broken vase, a reminder of how quickly a stable life could be shattered by people who claimed to love you. But Margaret Whitmore was still standing in her own living room, still making her own decisions, still controlling her own destiny. Chelsea's scheme had failed, David's betrayal had been exposed, and I'd learned exactly how strong I was when my back was against the wall. 6 months later, I received a check for $47,000 from David, who'd kept his promise to return every penny he'd taken. He'd also started therapy and ended his marriage to Chelsea, who'd moved to another state where she was reportedly targeting a different family. I kept my house, my independence, and my dignity. But most importantly, I kept the knowledge that Margaret Whitmore was nobody's victim, and anybody who tried to steal my life was going to get the fight of theirs. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's proving that you're stronger than the people who tried to destroy you.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.